Hi everyone, good evening. This is such an amazing turnout. We are so excited. My name is Diane, and along with Yuki, we are the Greenville Child Committee co-chairs. And CHILD stands for Children Having Individual Learning Differences. We have Fran in the back, who is our Sealy co-chair, and Alicia, who, we're moms. She couldn't come tonight, but she is your Sealy co-chair as well. This is Jessica. She is our PTSA co-chair along with Jody.
Yep. So hi, I'm Jessica Go. My co-chair is traveling today, so she unfortunately can't be here, but we are your resource for 7 to 12.
And we are your resource for K through 6. The PTA Child Committee was formed in April of 2022, and it was welcomed so greatly that the PTSA decided to bring the Child Committee to the upper level as well. Our goal is to provide support and community to our families in Edgemont with children who have learning differences. The presentation tonight was brought about because we really listened to all the families, and it shows tonight by how many people have come. We listened to what's important, and our goal is to support all of you. So we reached out to Joe Shippa, Dr. Schippa, as everybody knows. He's our former special ed director and a very, very respected psychologist, and he jumped at the chance to help out his former Edgemont family. So thank you so much for that.
We would also like to thank our administrators who are here tonight to support the child committees. Thank you to Dr. Hamilton for your leadership and working with us to show that in Edgemont, all means all, and every child, regardless of their difference, is truly valued member of the Edgemont community. So we would like to invite Dr. Hamilton at this moment to come up and say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. I am just about talked out from late nights over the last 2 weeks. But first of all, I do want to thank the Child Committee for their advocacy and their support. When I first came to the district, this was one of the first groups I met with, and I learned so much about the investment in children in our district who are differently abled and how much work we have to do in terms of providing opportunities to ensure a totally inclusive community and one that embraces children all across the continuum, and particularly those who are differently abled. But more importantly, the parent partnership that happens when we all come together and how that benefits our children, particularly children who have traditionally been marginalized and sometimes overlooked. It's really been my honor and my pleasure to work with the parent group, with CHILD in particular, as we learn to support and remove barriers that sometimes impede access and opportunities for our children. And I would be remiss if I didn't pause and introduce board members who are here tonight. Grace Lynn is with us this evening, and Nilesh Jain is with us this evening, and they have been incredibly supportive during my entry into the district. And I guess at some point I have to stop saying it's my entry, but I'm going to get as much mileage out of it. Special ed happens to be my background, so I do have a special affinity for children who are differently abled. And I have always enjoyed kind of rooting for the underdog, so to speak, not just because of my background in special ed, but because of my commitment to make sure that we remove barriers all across the district, all across our educational community, for all children who may not be your traditional learners or learn in the traditional way, and helping to find ways that we can access those students and tap into their talents. Many of our children are twice gifted, and that sometimes get overlooked because we're so used to looking at kids through one lens. So with the help of the Child Committee, with the support of the administrators and the board members, we are committed to removing those barriers and creating opportunities to ensure total access to athletics, academics, co-curricular, extracurricular, so that we really are a community that embraces all of our children, regardless to where they fall in that continuum. So thank you for listening to me for these few minutes. I hope you have an amazing night. I am available at any time, and I really do mean that. I have an open door policy. Feel free to stop by if you're in the area or you're on the campus and you want to stop by. Shoot me an email. I do answer all my own emails, so you don't have to worry about it being filtered and triaged by an assistant. I answer all my own emails, so if you need to reach out to me, feel free. It's khamilton, like everybody else, at edgemont.org. So thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.
So before we begin our presentation, a little background on Dr. Schippa, and for people who don't know him. Dr. Joe Shippa is a clinical coaching and consulting psychologist in private practice in Briarcliff Manor. He received his PhD in psychology from Fordham University and his postdoctoral at Fielding Graduate University. Dr. Schippa has had a long and storied career in education as a music teacher, a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher, a school psychologist, and a school district administrator. He is the former director of Pupil Personnel Services in Edgemont. In addition to his private practice, Dr. Schippa is also a consultant for Southern Westchester BOCES Center for Professional Learning and Curriculum Support. And with that, we welcome Dr. Schippa.
So don't applaud yet. I'm going to set this timer because there's a lot of information that I want to try to get through, and I also want to give you some time to ask questions, because my experience has been that when we start to talk about topics like this, and especially kids, and we're going to find out a little bit of who you are here, what the mix looks like in a few minutes. There are a lot of questions you're going to have. You're going to, something's going to pop into your head, and you might want a short little consultation, this big, and we'll just take it from there. Okay. So it's a very long title for this, and it came to me because Diane had contacted me to do this, and I said to her, well, what do people want? It was like, well, just come and speak. And I was like, well, I could do that, but really, what do people want? What does the Child Committee, what are they hearing from the community for specific kinds of topics that they would want? So ADHD came up, surprise, surprise. Anxiety came up, another surprise. But the topic of self-regulation really started to float in there. And I thought, well, that really all goes together, because, and you'll see why in a few moments, how this starts to come together with ADHD and anxiety and self-regulation. So what am I clicking to get to the next thing here? Buzzing. Oh, we're just going to do it.
Not touchscreen.
Touchscreen.
Not touchscreen.
Oh, we're going to do that. No, not touchscreen. I got a new computer this year for my office, and it's got this huge screen, and it's a touch screen, but it's so far away from me that I never use it, and but the people that come into my office, especially the kids, when they see it, they're like, that's a touch screen. I'm like, yeah, well, I don't have 12-foot arms, so what can I tell you? Anyway, just a few disclosures. First, I have no financial disclosure or conflicts of interest to report regarding the material that I'm presenting during this presentation. The second one is, I will not discuss the appropriateness of material presented in relation to school district CSE, Committee on Special Education, Individualized Education Program recommendations, or Section 504 accommodations. That it wouldn't be fair for me to address those kinds of issues in a forum like this. Kids have IEPs because they're individualized. So the kind of material that I'm going to be presenting should start to spark some ideas for you maybe that you might want to talk about, with other people in the district. But I'm not going to specifically address those kinds of things. And the third one is, though I might speak about medications, I am not a medical doctor, even though I'm a neuropsychologist. I cannot make specific recommendations regarding medications, so we're not going to do that. Jonathan, it's not doing it. There we go. Okay, got it. Just a copyright disclaimer. It's a fair use copyright disclaimer. The things that I'm presenting, much of this can be found online. And so I want you to recognize that we're doing this under fair use, which is for educational purposes, because we're not doing this for any kind of profit. This really doesn't like me. There we go. So, we're going to find out a little bit about you. Can you hear me out here? Okay. You do not have to self-disclose if you don't want to. Or you?
I'll disclose.
You'll disclose. You don't have to self-disclose. You know, I get it. You have your privacy, but I want to get a little bit of a sense of this. So I'm assuming most of you are parents. Are you a parent with a student, a learner that is a neurodiverse learner, a parent of a student with anxiety?
Yes.
Diagnosed anxiety disorders.
Yes.
Not just, I'm a little worried, Mom and Dad. Okay. Are you a parent of a student with emotional dysregulation?
Yes.
Do you have ADHD? You don't have to disclose.
Yes. Yes.
Very much so, yes.
Do you have anxiety?
Yes.
Do you have emotional dysregulation? Not in relation to your kids' emotional dysregulation, but emotional dysregulation that's separate from your kids, like before you had them. Okay, so that's kind of where you are. You heard a little bit about me, and but I'm going to tell you a little bit more. So you heard the professional qualifications that I have. You also heard that I have this long and storied career in all these certifications. And that was just a real small fraction of the certifications that I have. But I was a music teacher, a general education teacher, a special education teacher, a school psychologist, a school administrator. And in between all of those things, I held very different roles. So I had been a coordinator of elementary special education at one point. I was a CSE chair at another point. All of these little things that go with the roles inside it. I wasn't all of those things in one district. I started out when I was 10 in a Catholic school. I was hired by the principal of this school, who I'm still very friendly with, and she lives locally in Bronxville. And it was a 7th grade class that 2 teachers had already quit on, and it was November. And I was fresh out of college with a music degree. And she said, I need a music teacher, but I need somebody who could do 7th and 8th grade math and science. And I said, I don't have a job. I'll do that. And she said, I'm giving you 2 weeks. This 7th grade class is one of the worst classes I've ever had in my career. And if it doesn't work within 2 weeks of you just trying to pull them together, and if you don't feel you can do it, and it's really not my observation that this is a good match, we can part ways, and I'm going to take over, and I will be the principal and the teacher for that class. Well, it set me on my journey at that point in education, because I used music to get through a class of kids that were really, really struggling as a whole. In terms of the community of learners, they did not know how to relate to one another, and they did not know how to achieve and become engaged learners. So I used this whole music program. I pared down, the first year that I was there, I pared down Grease into a very clean version for 7th grade, and the kids built the sets, and we did the music, and they did their own choreography, and they sang and danced their way to, success. Their academic scores were stunningly different by the end of the year, because they were engaged learners, not because I was a brilliant teacher, but they were engaged learners. So that set me on my track. I had been deciding at that point whether I was going to stay in the music world, because I was also auditioning for many Broadway plays, and I was doing commercials on the side, and all these things, you know, and then I started to get into public relations behind the scenes for Broadway shows, and then I thought, well, you know what, I'm gonna go back to school, and I got a master's degree in elementary and special education. And when I completed that, I went on to teach high school special education in 2 high school districts in Westchester, Blindbrook, and then to Ossining after that. And they were great years. But at that particular point too, between being a PR rep for neurotic actresses and actors, and being with special ed kids who had a lot of emotional baggage, I decided I probably needed a PhD in psychology just to survive what I was doing. And so I began graduate school, but I continued to teach. And then when it came time for me to do the internship phase of the doctoral program, I left teaching, went and did a clinical internship, and then became a school psychologist after that, and opened a clinical practice. So that's a little bit about my background, just a little bit. And if you haven't yet figured out in that short little synopsis that I am one of those neurodiverse people with ADHD and anxiety, then you haven't been listening. So I speak from very, very close experience. This has been a journey for me. Diagnostically, didn't happen until I was in my 30s. And I knew it all along. I knew it because I understood those kids that I had. I knew their minds. I knew I could predict what they were going to do. I saw all their self-regulation issues. I had them too, but I masked them. I was able to suppress them, which is amazing because most kids can't. But I was able to do that largely because I think I went to elementary school, Catholic elementary school, and had nuns. And in first grade, I had separation anxiety, and the principal did not like this and thought that the way to get this out of me was to literally paddle it out of me. And so every day, she would come in, and I would have to get in front of the class, and she'd paddle me until my father found out. He was my first advocate in my life. So I know what this is like. I always knew I was different. I couldn't sit still. I was constantly asking questions, and so I spent many, many years in elementary school in the hall, because they didn't know what to do with me. Give you the book, put you in the hallway. I was a very early reader, so I could read, I could comprehend. I knew what I was learning on my own. I'd come back into the class, I'd take the test. I was fine. But I was, of course, missing out on the pieces that I needed, which was to be part of a classroom. So this is a personal journey. You will hear me go through this a bit, and I will relate very interesting things to you, I hope. This is the way most people tell a story, the way you might tell a story, but this is the way I will tell a story. All right, so you have to bear with me. The good thing about the PowerPoint slides is that it does keep me on track sometimes. So it's kind of like, you know, we translate that into non-ADHD storytelling and ADHD storytelling, okay? I have friends in my life who are really wonderful people, but when they start to get the glazed look on their faces and they're looking through me, I know that they're like, they are lost at that point, lost at that point. And I know that I'm probably lost. I probably took, you know, another way around. My very close friends know enough to say, okay, stop, go back, you're off track. So what we're going to try to do is to present an introduction to diagnostic criteria for ADHD and anxiety disorders, to render a working definition of emotional self-regulation, because it's important to understand that in relation to these two disorders, to describe how emotional self-regulation is impacted by ADHD and anxiety, and finally to share ways to improve emotional self-regulation and build resilience in neurodiverse learners with ADHD and anxiety. So there is going to be a practical component to this. So let's just go quickly through this. I do have a couple of video, I have 3 YouTube clips that are very, very brief. They're like 2 minutes each, just to give you a little bit of an overview so that I'm not droning on, which I could do. An ADHD is inattentive ADHD, and then of course you have the hyperactive, restless, impulsive ADHD, and you have a combined as well. So by the end of this presentation, you can tell me which type I have. Making careless mistakes, lacking attention to detail, difficulty sustaining attention, doesn't seem to listen when spoken to directly, fails to follow through on tasks and instructions, poor organization, disliking or avoiding tasks requiring sustained mental effort, losing things necessary for tasks and activities, easily distracted, including unrelated thoughts. They go inside their head. And you're like, where are you? I don't know what happened, you know? And then forgetful in daily activities. That's the one that drives parents crazy all the time. What do you mean you forgot your homework? You know, how could you forget to brush your teeth? It has no relevance to many kids, you know? Your teeth are going to rot out. I hear all kinds of things. Do you really think that sticks with them? They really honestly don't care. They're not figuring their teeth are going to rot out, you know? Maybe yours are, Mom, Dad, but not mine. The hyperactive impulsive type, fidgeting, or tapping your hands, your feet, squirming in your seat, leaving your seat when remaining seated is expected, experiencing feelings of restlessness. You ask these kids what they're going through, and they will tell you that they have this feeling inside them, their bodies. You may not even see it, but it's there. They feel something is going on. Difficulty engaging in quiet, leisurely activities, is on the go as if driven by a motor, talking excessively, blurting out answers, difficulty waiting there, interrupting or intruding others. Sound familiar? And these are the criteria when you're looking at diagnostically. We're looking for 6 or more symptoms of inattention, 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, must have persisted for at least 6 months, to the degree that is inconsistent with the developmental level and negatively impacts social and academic and occupational activities. Several of the symptoms, whether they're inattentive or hyperactive, impulsive, were present before the age of 12. You do not develop attentional disorders without some type of brain injury or some type of chemical process that hits you just suddenly when you're 15 or 16 or 17 years old. It doesn't work that way. You have to be seeing these things from an early age. Several symptoms, inattention or hyperactive impulsive, must be present in more than 2 settings: home, school, work, friends and relatives. This is why we use rating scales. I'm sure that those of you who have gone through this process to have your child diagnosed or yourself, you know that rating scales are used. And we get them in different settings, school and home. And my mother and my father complain about this. And that's when I'm talking to them, I say, well, if they're complaining about it, but you don't believe them, that's okay. But they are complaining about it, right? Gives me a little bit of a clearer picture. Clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of social, academic, or occupational function. So attentional disorders that are difficult, they have to be impacting your life. There are some people with attentional disorders that it doesn't impact them as much. But that's usually because they find their niche in something else and they're going along with that. But you'll hear from their partners often that it may impact them in other ways in terms of their relationships. These symptoms must occur often, may be classified as mild, moderate, or severe. Several symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity together may indicate the combined presentation of ADHD. And the symptoms do not occur exclusively during the course of things like schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder that or not by another mental disorder. So a mood disorder, for instance, has inattentional to it, but the mood disorder is characteristically different because it's overshadowed by a specific episodes of mood, of depression, and or mania. A lot of times, I found that teachers are pretty sensitive to this and they don't just call on people indiscriminately anymore. But they might ask you a question and you haven't heard it, your frontal lobes have been shut down, all of a sudden, what do you think happens when you're put on the spot? You get anxious. Keep it in mind because you're going to see how this plays out brain-wise. So this is examples of everyday anxiety and an anxiety disorder. You see that it's a little different. If it's everyday stuff, you're worrying about assignments, tests, deadlines, money, relationships. But if it's a constant worry without cause that interrupts daily life, that might be an anxiety disorder. It's different. You know, everybody worries. I certainly do. Feeling awkward in some social situations. But if you avoid social gatherings out of fear of feeling uncomfortable or embarrassed, and you do it regularly so that you are isolating yourself, you may have an anxiety disorder. Panic before a big moment or an event. Pretty normal, you know, except that if you have panic attacks without cause and perpetual fear of having another panic attack, you may have an anxiety disorder. Fear of a dangerous object or a scenario, pretty normal, but if you have an irrational or unexplainable fear of something that possesses no danger, you might have an anxiety disorder. Getting the flavor of the difference? So, this is, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, am I allowed to ask a question?
Sure.
With that anxiety stuff, and I don't know if I'm using the right terminology.
Doesn't matter.
My brother used to say there are things that are ego dystonic and ego syntonic.
Right.
So, or just stuff you're aware about and stuff that other people are aware about, but you're not.
You're not.
Which is that?
You know, that's a little bit of a different, it's a little bit of a different take on this. That has to do mostly with when you're talking about self-awareness. You know, what is, what you're feeling is unacceptable. You know, it could be like your worry, let's just say, about something that is typically what you could worry about. If you ramp that up into something bigger, you know, then it would be an issue of, are you really exaggerating it? Are you perceiving it appropriately? You know, and that becomes an issue of, there may be other things going on there when you're using ego dystonic and ego syntonic. It may be a little bit different kind of thing that's going on there. In that situation, we're looking for, well, is this person understanding the reality of a situation? It's a little bit different. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental disorder in the United States right now. Over 40 million adults experience an anxiety disorder each year. There are many different types of anxiety disorders, including generalized anxiety disorders, social anxiety, specific phobias, and more. And anxiety disorders can develop for a number of reasons, including genetics. And ADHD, by the way, is a neurogenetic disorder. So if your kid has it and you have it, guess what? You're a gift to them. You know, I could also tell you that I have a daughter with it, but she's adopted. And so, you know, I said, well, you didn't get it from me. Yeah, that's just the way it is. I'm not taking responsibility for that. And she has the inattentive type, so it's a little bit different. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 13 people around the world suffer from anxiety. And only about a third of those suffering receive treatment for it. There's a lot of anxious people running around in this world. And about 8% of children and teenagers experience an anxiety disorder. So now we're going to learn a little bit about the brain and anxiety, specifically something called the amygdala. I'm going to change this over here. Those are your kinds of anxiety disorders. Generalized obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder, okay? And it's a very specialized kind of experience in terms of anxiety and difficult to treat. I have a lot of folks with OCD, serious OCD. OCD is not just straightening your books. you know? OCD is far more complex.
Sorry, you might get to this, but I wonder if you can talk about the relationship between tic disorder and ADHD.
Okay, yeah, that's a little bit different because tic disorders we still don't know enough about because we know, well, we speculate that it's a misfiring of neurons and a random firing of neurons that create these tics. You all know what a tic is? You know, blinking eyes that can, you know, saying things, clearing your throat uncontrollably, shrugging your shoulders, things like that. So that seems to come from a random misfiring of neurons. The problem is that not everybody with a tic disorder has an attentional disorder that is like ADHD. The ticking itself creates the distraction and takes you away from things, so you are inattentive. But there are some people who have both, and therefore you try to treat them, especially medically, often with a stimulant medication, but you have to watch if you're using a stimulant medication with somebody with tics because it can exacerbate the tics. So there's a whole lot of, you know, I always say with medications, psychotropic medications, and I tell all my patients this too, you know, when they first start on it and they don't like what this feels, or they don't feel that, or they don't like that. And I always say, look, there's an art and a science to this, you know, and we're working on the science part right now, and then the art is in getting it right. And you're gonna have to be patient until that happens. Panic disorders, specific phobias, social phobias, also known as social anxiety, separation anxiety disorder, and selective mutism, which we don't hear a lot about, but it absolutely exists. Selective mutism are kids who don't talk. You know, they just don't talk. And we don't, you know, sometimes it's an anxiety disorder. I have found that sometimes it's a significant language disorder too. Depends on what you're looking at. Sometimes it's both. Depends on what the evaluations tell you. So I'm going to shoot back to this for a second. Now I'm going to go to Chrome, right? Here we go. Chrome. Getting the hang of it. Now you're going to learn about the amygdala.
Holistically explain neuroscience
I think this is it.
topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss the amygdala. The amygdala is a collection of nuclei found in the temporal lobe. There are 2 amygdalae, one in each cerebral hemisphere. The term amygdala means almond, referring to one of the most prominent nuclei of the amygdala that has an almond-like shape. The major nuclei of the amygdala include the lateral nucleus, basal nucleus, accessory basal nucleus, central nucleus, medial nucleus, and cortical nucleus. Each of these nuclei can also be partitioned into subnuclei. One common scheme for anatomically organizing the amygdala is to divide it into a basolateral region made up of the lateral, basal, and accessory basal nuclei, and a corticomedial region made up of the cortical, medial, and central nuclei. There are, however, other common ways of anatomically dividing the amygdala as well. The amygdala has traditionally been considered part of the limbic system, a group of structures linked to the processing of emotions. The amygdala has historically best been known for its role in processing fearful emotions. When a threatening stimulus is present in the environment, it is thought that the amygdala is also involved in identifying it as a threat and initiating a fight or flight response to it. More recent evidence, however, indicates that the amygdala is active during the processing of positive stimuli as well. Thus, it is now thought the amygdala's role is more complex than that of a threat detector. It may be involved with assigning positive or negative value to stimuli, and with the consolidation of memories that have a strong positive or negative emotional component. It is also still being explored in a variety of other behaviors, ranging from addiction to social interaction. Thus, its functions are diverse and still not fully understood.
So important to know about the amygdala because it's the seat of the fight or flight response. And the important part of that is that when that is, it's part of the limbic system, which is the seat of all these emotions, and when that part is hijacked, all hell breaks loose. And if you have ADHD and your amygdala is hijacked and your frontal lobe, which is the seat of that thinking and reasoning that you're able to then think your way through a problem, is not functioning, this is where you start to get significant emotional dysregulation. And your kids are like, you don't understand how they are. They're like, you know, they used to say, oh, we need an exorcist, you know, for some of them, because you don't understand why they're so upset, and it could be the littlest thing that you can't predict. But however they perceived it, their amygdala gets hijacked, they can't think through it because they're shut down, and you're in a state of emotional dysregulation. Loads of fun, right? Those of you who've been there. And it's not their fault. I just need to put that out there. It's not their fault. This is a neurogenetic disorder, and it's a developmental disorder. And so if you put it all on them, you're making a big mistake, because it's not their fault. So what it's like when you're overthinking in an anxiety disorder. Everything coming at you, burying you. Okay, your kids feel this way when homework is upon them. They don't know how to sort. Remember what I said, there's an executive functioning disorder that's part of this. That's all the planning, organizing, self-initiating, getting a sense of when something starts and ends. ADHD people are very, very, you know, typically they don't predict time well at all. And so it's part of the executive functioning problem that they have. And then when there's so much coming at them, and the anxiety starts to get ratcheted up, and especially if they know that the consequence is I'm going to get a bad grade, or I'm not going to get to go wherever, to the pool, or you know, to the team tonight, to rehearsal, whatever it is that they're going to, unless they get this done, they're now in that state of emotional dysregulation. And you're stuck with it. You know, it's their gift to you. So this connection, the link between ADHD and anxiety, has been established with rates approaching 50%. And because of the overlap of some of the symptoms of both of these things, you have to rule out anxiety when you're trying to diagnose ADHD, and the other way around. So individuals diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety, you generally have more severe symptoms of anxiety than those with just ADHD. Because you have a lot of things going on. You have two regions of the brain being lit up. The symptoms of ADHD that affect academic work and social functioning can lead individuals to experience more anxiety, thus worsening the ADHD symptoms. The more anxious your ADHD kid gets, the more distracted they get, the more unreasonable they get, the less you're able to plan with them. It's a nightmare. I get it. Totally get it. And the consistent inconsistency of ADHD exacerbates anxiety. For instance, doubt and uncertainty that deadlines can be met, tasks can be completed, and promises can be kept. How many times have your kids promised you that they're gonna, I promise I'm going to get the homework done? And you go, okay. And you do whatever you do. You know, some type of ritual, you pray, I don't know. You go drink, whatever. And you let it go. You're like, it's going to happen. And it doesn't. And the cycle begins again. Still having trouble here. Come on.
Tap it, don't click.
What's that?
Tap.
There we go. Same pieces here. The interaction of ADHD symptoms and anxiety, it interacts on the severity of neural activity. And anxiety modulates the relation between ADHD severity and working memory related brain activity. You know what working memory is? the ability to keep information in your head and then to be able to use it. So, unfortunately, ADHD folks have difficulty with working memory. That's what is also a part of the executive functioning piece. And then if you have anxiety on top of it, it interferes with your ability to use your working memory. Working memory is a strong determinant of functional outcomes such as academic achievement. That's why you have your kids, you know, you can have them tutored. They seem to know everything. They're smart. They get into the test. And they don't want to tell you what they got. And they don't know why. You know? And you don't know why. You need to study more. Oh, yeah, right. Okay? It's not about that. It truly isn't about that. And especially if you have the anxiety that begins to creep in, remember the dysfunction of the attentional dysfunction gets worse, and then the working memory is not there, and they don't have the information to bring forth. They also, because of the executive dysfunction, have difficulty translating the information into different formats. You know, when you know that they know the information for the test, but the question is asked differently than the way they studied it, their executive dysfunction doesn't allow them to transpose it and figure it out. Like, oh, yeah, that's this. It looks like an entirely different question to them. ADHD with co-occurring anxiety may involve lowered information filtering, which can affect task accuracy. You see these inattentive symptoms are more strongly correlated with anxiety than with hyperactivity. Executive dysfunctions rather than ADHD symptoms may lead to comorbid anxiety, mood disorders, difficulties in daily life in adolescence, and ADHD inattentive symptoms, executive functions, and functional impairment predicted anxiety in adolescence. That's why we see this a lot coming out in the secondary kids, you know. They seem to be fine, especially the bright kids, seem to be fine except for the ADHD stuff, and then they hit the high school. And grades count. Anxiety ramps up, they can't retrieve, their working memory's impaired, the executive function pieces don't come together for them, and you know, you have kids who don't want to come to school. Executive dysfunction is an important treatment target in alleviating anxiety in adolescents with ADHD. So one of the things that we're dealing with right now is part of what you need to do is to be able to try to treat executive function deficits. You have to identify those things. What's really faulty? Is it the self-initiation? Is it the planning? Is it the organizing? Is it all of it? Then it needs to be worked with because you're giving them the tools. Now, it's not easy because they don't want to be told what to do. But that's a whole other thing that goes on with it. But it's becoming more and more prevalent that becomes a target of treatment. So know this, that ADHD is a performance problem. It's not what you know, it's whether you can show what you know. It's a performance, it's an output problem. So you may have the most brilliant kid, but they can't seem to show it. And that's what ADHD does. It doesn't allow you to show it. It also affects persistence, and which is a really hard thing, because if you're not persistent, you don't achieve. So you see your kids give up. I'm done. No, you're not done. You know, let's go back over it again. Oh, I'm done. They don't persist. It's another executive functioning deficit. I'm going to sort of fly through these a little bit. So you have this kind of thing going on. Motivation can't start, can't stop. Time, now, not now. You never know where it's going to be. Which one of these switches is flipping? This is a very big thing that a lot of people have not heard about this. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria. How many of you have not heard about RSD? So this has become, we don't talk about this enough because it's a brain-based symptom of ADHD. It's not part of the diagnostic piece, but I hear this all the time with these dysregulated kids. Individuals with RSD feel literally excruciating pain. You think they are dying. They are writhing on the couch or in their bedroom, on their bed, telling you how horrible everything is. And it's all in response to a perceived rejection or criticism. It could be nothing in your eyes, but it fires everything to them. It triggers this sense of rejection, that you don't love them anymore. They will tell you that. You hate me. I know you hate me. You know, you don't really want me. You know, I'm the worst kid. I hear that one a lot. Teasing can set this off. Criticism, constructive or otherwise. Persistent self-criticism of themselves or negative self-talk prompted by real or perceived failures. So when they have studied for the test and they don't do well on the test and they're surprised by that and they think they're dumb, the negative self-talk starts. Suddenly you have this emotional dysregulation. It's an RSD response. These are sudden emotional outbursts, withdrawal from social situations, lots of negative self-talk coming at them, thoughts of self-harm. That's when parents get very worried. They say they want to kill themselves or they wish they were dead. And you're rightfully you become concerned about it. But you can see them come out of that cycle and then everything seems okay again. And that's what's so weird, you know, and then you're like, oh, that's when we need an exorcist because we don't understand what demon got into this kid. But that's what happens. It's sort of, and that's the difference, by the way, between RSD and a mood disorder. Mood disorders are very different. They're pervasive and they stay for a period of time, where RSD, it cycles through and everything seems fine after they've called you every name in the book. And they think, what's the matter? And you're like, do you understand what you just said? And they're like, what? And that's when you think something's really wrong here. So just a little bit about this. Resilience, it's a process, an outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. So there are things that contribute to how well people can be resilient and adapt to adversities. And predominant among them are the ways in which individuals view and engage with the world, the availability and quality of social resources, and specific coping strategies. And folks with ADHD and anxiety have deficits in those areas, typically. Psychological research demonstrates that resources and skills associated with more positive adaptation, that is greater resilience, can be cultivated and practiced. But it takes a lot. It's a journey. It's not happening just, tomorrow, just so that you know. One of the things that we've become very interested in is neuroplasticity. And I'm trying to get back to that other slide. There we go. Oh. It's defined as the ability of the nervous system to change its activity in response to intrinsic or extrinsic stimuli by reorganizing its structure, functions, or connections. We used to think that you couldn't develop more brain cells. We now know you can. We now know that neural pathways can be carved into people and in people's brains, and they can learn to adapt better. I'm not going to do this YouTube piece because it basically says the same thing. These are exercises to develop neuroplasticity for anxiety and ADHD, if you can get people to do them, if they have the persistence to do them. Memory tasks and games, learning to juggle. I've always wanted to do that. I'm really terrible at it. Learning to play a new instrument, learning a new language, yoga, mild to moderate regular exercise, challenging brain activities like crosswords, learning a new subject, especially a large complex subject in a short period of time. Things that give you, get you learning.
How about a chiropractor? We're going to a chiropractor for this neuroplasticity and everything.
Right. I don't have an opinion because I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I've only used my chiropractor for my back.
For our students, right, for our children, and that's a big kind of, for the neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And this is also neurological and nervous system, and they also have digestive problems, and it all kind of is a holistic.
I think there's a lot of new information coming out around, and there's a field in psychology called energy psychology, which is developing right now, which is based on, pretty much the idea of chi in the body. And so there are people that use acupuncture, for these kinds of things. I'm going to show you a little technique that's called EFT tapping, which is acupuncture without needles, where you're tapping on meridian points that are part of the experience of shifting the energy, we call it, and realigning things. I'm sort of like for whatever thing that works, and the placebo effect is an extremely powerful effect. So if it works, use it, Like, I don't care, if you think that's going to be part of it, it's good.
I was just on the same topic. What about the neurostimulation? It's the new field as well, where the kids get something on their head,
Yeah.
and they watch a video.
Yeah,
and
so that's it's a neurofeedback.
neurofeedback.
Yeah.
Yes.
The problem with neurofeedback is it requires a great deal of attention. And what we're dealing with are people that don't have attention. And it requires a lot of sessions. Like you have to keep going back, and then technically you're supposed to have at least some type of unit. At home, I understand, and you're supposed to be able to do it almost daily in order for you to gain more control over your attention. It's hard for people with ADHD, just like mindfulness is hard. And I love mindfulness. I teach mindfulness. But with my ADHD folks, we do mindfulness 1 minute at a time. We start with 1 minute, and then we add a minute each time. Because if you think they're going to sit there for 10 minutes, good luck. Not happening.
With that list of exercises, if you just did one thing again and again and again, would you get benefit? Or
Yes.
do you really have to be scattering?
No, repetition on anything is going to help to create more neural plasticity. This should become your mantra with your children. Remind yourself. We do not have the same brain. When your kid is, you don't understand that, remind yourself, we do not have the same brain. It's because they think the way you think. They do not. They do not have your experience. They do not have your life. They have their own lives. They're developmentally at a whole different place than you are. And so parents say to me all the time, well, why is it they don't understand? And I'm like, because they don't have your brain. They're not you. They're them. Your job is to try to understand them, not them to try to understand you. Eventually we want them to understand that through theory of mind stuff, but take care. Bye, Mark. See you later. So we do not have the same brain. Something else to remember, I love this quote by Maya Angelou. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. You see it, it is what it is. You all are familiar with this, I'm sure. Can you please do this thing? Okay. Did you do this thing? Sorry, I got distracted and forgot. You get exasperated. They have a defensive excuse. You get angry. They feel guilty. Usually that's where the RSD hits. You've criticized me. They go into the meltdown, and your evening is shot. You're not even, and if you try homework after that, you know, you're at your own risk. This is me. This was in the New Yorker last week. I was like, this is the best thing I've seen in a long time. I leave a lot of people like, you know, a lot of people in sawed in half. It's like, that's me, definitely me. Why do I always commit? So some techniques. And we're going to share these slides with you too, so you'll have these. So, this is an Andrew Weil technique. Andrew Weil is a medical doctor out at the University of Arizona that does a whole holistic medicine program out there, integrated medicine. This is a really great technique, and kids actually can do this. My ADHD kids, I think I've taught it to every single ADHD kid and their parent. It's a technique for anxiety. It's a 4-7-8. You breathe in for 4, slowly, not 1, 2, 3, 4, but 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold for 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you exhale on 8. And you do that, you do it and you check, where am I right now? And then you do it again if you need to. It's a great one for sleep. ADHD kids with anxiety, or without anxiety, or without ADHD, have trouble sleeping. It's a really good technique for sleeping. I think that's why he really developed it too. These are grounding techniques. Again, they'll be on the slide and available to you. 5 senses. When things are really spinning, I will say to kids, good night, take care, Ken, thank you. Find 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. It gets them grounded, puts them in the real world. Distraction. Name all the red things you see. Count backwards by 3 from 100. Recite a poem or a song. Pick a category and name all the things you can in that category. Place your feet flat on the floor. Starting at the crown of your head, focus on your body piece by piece, paying attention to each tiny movement and feeling as you breathe. And then the breathing techniques, focusing on your breathing from your diaphragm, your stomach, and just practicing slowing down. This is a tip skill. Tip skills come from the literature on dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. This is when someone is really in a supercharged state. You know, T stands for temperature. Submerge your face in ice water, put ice packs under your eyes to stimulate your vagus nerve and to lower your heart rate. Intense exercise. Raising your heart rate will increase your cardio and will cause your body to lower your physical arousal and your symptoms of anxiety. Paced breathing, paired muscle relaxation. These are more concrete than doing mindfulness. They are part of mindfulness, but they are much more active. And for people with ADHD, and especially kids, the active part is helpful. They hear enough about people telling them to be quiet. This is what I was talking about before, the energy circuitry. This is EFT tapping. EFT is emotional freedom techniques. I'm very big on this because, and I have a colleague of mine, we are developing a self-regulation protocol for parents, teachers, and kids. When I was actually here, working here as the director, I paired up with Phaedrus, the A school, and taught the kids how to do this, and we did it for test anxiety. And basically what this is these are tapping points on your body. And you can change cognitions with it too, but you could just tap on these and not do anything else. And you will see that what it does is, and we have research backing this up. I have a friend of mine is Dr. Peter Stapleton, who's at Bond University in Australia, and she's done a tremendous job of testing this model out and has fMRI studies and the whole bit, that shows that this triggers the amygdala to calm down. And so I teach this to practically all the people that I see. I see adults as well, not just ADHD people, but this has been a very helpful tool. This model here, and we're at 8:13, so you tell me what we can continue to do. I would like time for questions for folks because I think they want them, but this piece is a really important thing I teach my kids with ADHD and anxiety. This is a cognitive model that they have to understand what happens in their thinking. I'm trying to get them to get a model in their head, and what I also do is text this to them, those that have phones, and I say, you need to put this on your phone, put it on your screen, find it somewhere in a file, because when you are hijacked, you need a process. You have to figure out what happened that created this thought that led to this emotion and sent you off into some terrible behavior that you're regretting. Now, most of them are here on the emotion because amygdala gets hijacked, they can't think, remember? So they're here. So when you say to them, well, what are you thinking? They go, I don't know. I don't have a thought. Why are you asking me that question? And I'm like, because if you can stop yourself for a moment, and we might do a breathing technique, we might tap, we might, do a breathe with the Andrew Weil breathing, and then I'll say, now, tell me, go back to that feeling and tell me what you're thinking. And 9 out of 10 times they can do it. And then you have this in front of them that, what gave you that thought? What happened that gave you that thought? I got my test back. And what happened? Now this is a kid who suppressed his reaction in class. Very upset. I left class, I got the test back, I failed it. Okay? I stayed in class, I left class. And then I got really upset. What were you thinking? I failed the test again. I'm failing this class. I'm not, and it starts down the road. I'm not going to get into the college that I want to get into. My parents are going to be disappointed. I mean, you can list the thoughts that are leading to this terrible anxiety, this terrible feeling of hopelessness that starts to happen. And then what did they do? They blew up at somebody in the cafeteria, they walked out of school, they whatever. So I'm always coming back to this model. And this model gets more complicated. It starts to, we then get to this later on, things ping pong around, and what about the physiological sensations? What are you feeling in your body when this is happening? Let's see if we can get rid of that sensation and if it changes your feelings and your thoughts. You're becoming prescriptive. That's the whole idea. Like, they want to know what to do. Kids don't want to be like this, trust me. They want to know what to do. And you have to keep telling them, like I say to them, it's a journey. We're on the journey together. It's not always going to work, but we'll figure it out. And once they get talking about it, they start to analyze it themselves. It's amazing what they start to come up with. I mean, you can't imagine, And then we get into this whole thing later. What do they believe about themselves? Because all of these failures, all of these mishaps create a perception of who they are. I'm a bad person. I can't learn. I am different. I am defective. And then you're in a whole other psychological territory about what you're going to do to correct that perception. So I think I'm going to stop there. There's more stuff on here. Maybe we'll do part 2 next week. No. And just questions. If you don't have
I
any.
have one. So, you briefly mentioned OCD.
Yes.
Can you have OCD and ADHD?
Yes. Can you have it?
Can you, sorry?
Can you have it, OCD
that's
and
what it is.
ADHD? Yes, you can. It's difficult, you know, the problem with OCD is that you have to treat, you have to treat the way they work with obsessive thinking and compulsions. And you're constantly sorting. There's a lot of education, by the way, that goes into this with kids. You have to tell them about themselves. You have to teach them about themselves. If you don't give them that knowledge, they don't know what's going on, and they go deeper into the hole. So with OCD, you know, it depends on what you're looking to, you know, to treat, and there's different ways of doing that. There's exposure treatment, exposure response treatment that you're going to use for kids with compulsions, or with, you know, even with social phobias, that you want to expose them to something so that they get that exposure, they see that they can get through it. But in OCD, they have to allow the urge to pass to do the compulsion. So it's a lot harder for them. And if you have ADHD and your executive functions are shut down, it's really hard to engage in the process of that. So I do a lot of relaxation training with my kids with OCD, because they have to go to something to get themselves to just relax first. And then we figure out, you know, what we're going to target. And we do it one at a time, because we want to have success. You know, so if it's hand washing, we're just working on hand washing. If it's that they turn the light switch off, well, on and off and on and off and on, we're going to work on that. If it's obsessive thinking, we're going to work on the obsessive thinking and the challenges that you would use for that.
But if you have ADHD, you will never, I'm wondering, if you have ADHD, it's a constant work on yourself, or you can ultimately memorize the, I'm trying to understand, I have OCD.
Yeah.
But, I feel like when you are in some kind of like anxiety or phobia, it's hard to get out, right? So, but I'm feeling if you have ADHD at the same time,
Right.
memorizing the process and the mechanisms
Right.
to fight your fears for a child.
Right.
Is it something that, like, does this require like a therapy for the rest of their life? Or it's, sorry, I'm just.
No, I get
I'm new
it.
to that.
Yes, set up a trust fund for the therapy. So what you're doing is trying to give them tools so that they feel like they can learn these tools and that they're successful. And my goal with this is that I am looking for them to become successful enough with various portions of what we're dealing with so that they can be on their own with it. And my message to them is, you can come back, but you don't have to be here all the time. You know, let's see how you do on your own. Like, this is the process. I also teach parents how to coach their kids with that process, so that, because they're going to need to do that at home. I'm not there with them. So, you know, is it therapy forever? You know, I don't know. You know, I like to think of it as, you know, therapy is there, you use it when you need it. You know, you go to therapy when things are in a place where you know that it's interrupting your functioning in life, you know, and then you need to do something about it. And thank you for being honest about, you know, your own, you know, struggle with it. It's hard, you know, it's tough.
Can I get your opinion about the screen and both kind of the
I knew that was
exacerbating, you know, destructive piece of it, but also maybe the counterintuitive of some benefit to it?
So one of the things that I adhere to is something called the utilization approach. I utilize anything that I possibly can that's in the naturalistic experience of someone's life to try to work on the skill that you're trying to build. So if the skill is that you want them to limit their screen time, I don't get into the idea of it's bad for you. As soon as you tell a kid that, they're going to do it. Oh, it's bad for you. You're an adult. That makes me, you know, I'm going to do something bad. So what I do is, you know, we do a lot of family work around that, because I have to help parents determine a good system, a consistent system of what you want with screens. And it's got to be something that you can support and do very consistently every day. Otherwise, it's blown. And the kids know that. Remember, they have poor working memory, so they sometimes let that all go. Once you've not done it, they're right back to where they were before. So I don't make it a bad thing. The only thing that I get concerned, I mean, there are lots of things about screens, like what are your kids watching? That's a whole other thing. But if it's gaming, remember there are reward systems for people with ADHD. Sometimes you have to work the gaming into the reward system for getting something done. If it's homework, you're gonna have to chunk it. You can't expect that they're gonna spend an hour on homework, even if you're medicating them. It's just too much to expect. So you have to figure out what works. And not every kid is the same that has this, because they have their personalities too that go into it. So I do a lot of family work around screens, and then we assess, like, how's it going? And the kids are great, because the kids, they'll tell you the truth. When the parents don't. But generally, look, it's a battle. We're in a different world, and it's going to be one of those things. And they love the screens because it's immediate gratification. Yes?
Are you going to share this presentation and then also can we find out more about some of the techniques that you were talking about, like the tapping and all that stuff? Like
Yeah.
how do we get more, like where?
So this will be shared with you. You'll see there's some references of people on there that you could just Google. I could talk to the child committee about if you want to do something more practical with these techniques. I don't know. We could come in and do something practical and to teach you some of these things.
Yes, please.
I'm open to that.
Joe, everyone can expect for this presentation to be included in each of the principal's weekly updates, so look for that in that next communication.
Yes.
I wanted to ask a question about the rejection sensitive dysphoria slide. You had a bullet about kids talking about like hurting themselves or they want to die.
Mm-hmm.
When do you know when that's a real feeling? Because you mentioned how that can quickly
It's a great
change
question.
with-
So if it's a consistent theme, you want to have it checked out. If it's during an episode, it's probably okay, because you notice that it comes during an episode. The thing that you want to always be careful about with kids with RSD is really impulsive kids and what they might do when they are in that level of distress. So that's where I'm always concerned. The kid that, I suddenly, my phone goes off and it's, we don't know what he might do, or, he's out on the balcony, or he ran out into the road. I take no chances with those kinds of things. It's like, no, you need to call 911 and have that checked out. It also communicates a very good message to the kid that, listen, we're going to take you seriously, and this is dangerous until they can find ways to control themselves. But it's mostly about, is it a theme that keeps coming up, repeating? Is it constant that you hear it? And even without RSD going on, if a kid is feeling really bad and there's a lot of negative self-talk, you'll start to see their mood change, and you'll start to see, you'll start to see a depression start to set in. And that's when you really want to intervene. That's when you need some professional help.
I would have a million questions. I have a million questions, but I just wanted to share. I don't know if this would be helpful to anybody, but you were just saying before that for the kids to know about themselves. And I'm so big on that with my son. He's a fourth grader, Greenville. We talk about it all the time, and I'm in special education as a speech pathologist. So it's like in our
Yep.
constant verbiage. But I found, I don't have the name of it in the Wi-Fi, I can't get anything right now, but there's if you just Google on YouTube, I think it's called This Is Me ADHD, and it comes out of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's 3 parts to it. I've been using that with my son. He loves it because he sees himself exactly in it. He knows the language behind it. But I've actually spoken to his teacher and the school psychologist to show that to the class.
Mhm.
He's very open to his ADHD. He knows what it means and all that stuff. Because I feel like so often it's like his name and stop, and you know, he knows, like everyone's like, stop touching me, don't
Right.
do this. So, you know, he's always the one out of his seat. That if the other children around him can recognize what's going on, that maybe they wouldn't feel such. I mean, he's social and he has great
Right.
friends, and that's great. But to feel that's why he's doing it. He's not just doing it to be a nudge and to
Right.
just do that.
Right.
So
I
if
mean-
you look, this is me ADHD. I find it wonderful. And with full disclosure, he said it's very low budget and very poor quality. Very poor quality. But I find it excellent. So
You know, when you own it and you can speak about it yourself, I tell people all the time, kids and adults alike, what we're doing as part of therapy is creating your story. You get to write this story, and you own this story, and you can also edit this story, change this story. How do you want the story to be? What do you want this, how do you want it to represent you? Because I also have to get kids to really be able to talk to their parents about what it's like for them in this process, you know? And then help parents to tell their kids what it's like for them to be experiencing, you know, that sense of, you know, you feel helpless sometimes. You don't know how to help them. You want them to do the homework. You don't want them going to school the next day without the homework, you know? And then you worry about that, you know, because it's like, well, I couldn't get them to do it. And then you write the email to the teacher and you're embarrassed and all this stuff that gets involved, right? I mean, we're human beings, folks. And trust me, you know, there are far more important things sometimes than doing the spelling words. I'm sorry, but it's just true.
Can I add something to that just for a second? At the high school, what we really try to do for the kids is to own who they are. And that becomes difficult because a lot of them are embarrassed at home. They're not embarrassed in school because everybody sees it. They're embarrassed at home because they've let you down. So we get them to try. And it's the biggest thing that I think Joe has said. I've said it a lot. Some of you who know me, it takes a village. And Rome wasn't built in a day.
Mhm.
It is a very slow process, because if they made it to high school or even middle school and they haven't owned who they are and what drives them, it's going to take a little longer. So we always ask the parent right away, maybe Edgemont isn't the place, I gotta get this, no. Sit down, breathe, relax, give us some time, give your child some time, and that's important. Sorry.
It's okay. Remembering this, doing your best looks different every day. Take care, Kyle. And it does. It's no straight line.
I agree that owning who you are, understanding who you are is the most important. But what happens when that becomes kind of your identity then, right? There's a difference between accepting who you are and then
Right.
an excuse.
Right. I just had a slide up there about coming from a reason mentality rather than a excuse mentality. This is the reason that I do this, but it's not an excuse to escape a responsibility. And I find this sometimes, you know, when people have accommodations. You know, an accommodation plan is not an excuse. It's a reason, it's based on the reason that you need the accommodation. You're getting it because it allows you equity, not because you get away with not doing something. You know, I said that I wasn't diagnosed until I was, you know, in my 30s, and when I was studying for my boards for to get my license, I just could not, for the life of me, get through that test under the time conditions. There was just no way. And what I discovered was when I went back, I actually found all my standardized testing when I was a kid, and where I scored very averagely. You know, with the numbers that I had, getting a PhD would probably not have been recommended. But I didn't know what those numbers meant. So I just kept pushing myself along. It was an intrinsic experience for me. And then when I found all that, I was like, I need to think about this. And I suddenly remembered that I was never finishing these tests. Like when they would say you had 5 minutes left, I'd make designs, you know. I never finished the SATs. I couldn't. So it was the time, that was the time when I asked my doctor for a letter that I submitted to the state to get extended time, and we filled out the paperwork. And I was never so happy in all my life because I needed it. And they put me in a room by myself. It was no windows. It was weird. It was archaic. And there were like 400 people in this other place, and I was alone with a monitor. And I'm thinking, I'm an adult. What am I doing in here? Is this prison? But the guy, the monitor that was there said to me, I need to tell you something. I've seen other people have this accommodation before, and they're finished like everybody else. You took every single minute. Didn't even go to the bathroom. I mean, it was like 6 hours, something like that. And that, I needed it. And my daughter was the same way. She needed that time. It's just what you have. It's not an excuse. It was a reason. The reason was I couldn't do it because I didn't have the planning ability and the timing in my head to time myself through that test.
When do you tell kids about their diagnosis, or is it more just talking them through, coaching them through the symptoms, or like?
Depends. If kids are medicated, you gotta tell them. Why are they taking this pill? I mean, it's not fair. They gotta know. Like, listen. Because when they start bucking doing it, and they will. They will. You know.
For unmedicated children,
Mhm.
when is?
When you know your kid best, but I would say that, you know, when you feel that they're cognitively able to understand what's going on, and when they have glitches enough that they are really wondering why they are glitching when their friends are not. Then you gotta tell them. Because they're already comparing, guarantee you.
They'll let you know, they'll know. They'll say
You know?
something like, no one else does this,
And then,
that's a good sign.
and then how do you guide that into the not the excuses, but
The reason, well, you know, this is happening because we're all wired differently. You know, our brains are wired differently. Everybody's brain is wired differently, and your brain is wired this way. And sometimes the connections that you need to make in these particular ways that keep you on track with things are the things that are not traveling quite as fast in the train in your head, those wires in your head. And that's okay, because, and then you could, if you have it too, it's a nice way to bond with your kid, to say, this is what I go through too. So, you know, it'll be okay. We're doing this, and here's another one, we're doing this together.
Let's say if there's a point in time where your kid just really feels, I am so different, I'm looked at differently, does it come to a point where a different school might be considered, you know, where
You know, I think it
self-concept, like you finished with, is a really important thing, and it's
you
so
know,
hard to go through 12 years of school if you're the different kid.
right, that is such an individualized kind of thing,
Right.
you know? It's such an individualized kind of thing. You can't say that it applies to every kid. It depends on what the kid is saying. Now, if it's a continual failure at something, you know, and your kid doesn't feel like he belongs, you might have to have that conversation. you know, the question always is, well, do you think, you know, I said to a kid the other day, paint me a picture of your perfect school for you. And it wasn't the school that he's in, you know? And you know, there it is. You're sort of like, oh, you realize this isn't where you belong. You know? And you also want to know, are they doing as well as they can under the conditions that they're in? And you also have to balance that out with how much protection you want to give them too, because some private schools are too protective, and it's not an easy decision. You know, it really isn't an easy decision. And the kid that gets removed from a setting that they really do want to be in, even though they may not be succeeding, then a whole other emotional thing starts to happen. You know, you took me out of here, and they will fail on purpose in the next place. You know, so it's different for every kid.
So regarding the neuroplasticity page, that there are all very challenging, difficult tasks, and you want the kids' lack of motivation and resilience to do those tasks, to build self-motivation and resilience. Like how as parents do,
Right.
like self-confidence.
Well, here's the thing. If it's going to be drill, 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 they have to have some interest in it. You know, you just don't pick it because it's like, oh, it's on the list. Oh, you're going to do, you know, juggling. And the kid is like, want to juggle, you know? So you have to really, it can't be just because of what you want. And remember what I said, there's a persistence issue here. So persistence is hard for these kids. So you can't do the, oh, well, you're going to do, you know, these worksheets for an hour, you know, because it's going to build neuroplasticity. No, you know, that won't build neuroplasticity. That'll build resentment, and you don't need that.
So how do you do that?
I would say, what's your child interested in? And then how do you then take what they're interested in and put it into something that's challenging, that they will stick to and want to do for a period of time. So it really is about talking to your kid, knowing, you know, how you're going to do that carefully.
So you have to be very careful and
Yeah.
would find a suitable challenge for him.
Mm-hmm. With his input.
Like how do you motivate him? Like it's like human's nature that trying to avoid any difficulties, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's challenging, that if I have to repeat, that if I have other choice, I would make any excuse to
Right.
try to escape.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, as parents, it's hard to.
Small successes. Small successes. They get one thing and they do it well. You know, you bake a cake. You know.
Oh, okay. So give them rewards.
Well, even if it's just recognition, you did it. And having the conversation, did you think you could do it before you did it, before you started it? Well, what did you find out? You learned something. That's the piece of it. Just a few things, because people are running out, and I don't blame you, I'm sorry. Educate yourself, your child, and others. Don't personalize. It's not about you. Remind yourself that you and your child do not have the same brain. Develop a reason mentality versus an excuse mentality. Collaborate with schools, clubs, or organizations and sports teams that your kids are on. Be cognitively flexible. Can't always be your way. Think out of the box. Stay solution focused. And engage support for yourself and your child when you need it. I was doing an executive functioning plan with a college student today.
studies, math. How to tackle that? It's chaotic every night, chaotic.
So one idea I would give you is what I was just talking about, executive functioning energy. Starting to talk to your kid about how much energy do these assignments,
I do that.
and which ones do you think it could change each day? Let's look at the assignments. We're gonna do them one at a time, because if you put them all out there, it's overwhelming. This is your science, this is your math, do a quick review of it. Don't get yourself worked up, just take a breath. You want them calm, because you don't want them going off. And let's decide which ones would be the easiest ones to do, the hardest ones to do, the ones in the middle. Let's rate them. Do you have enough executive functioning energy to start with the hard ones? Or the easy ones? Or the ones in the middle? You're teaching them how to do this themselves, to measure their own abilities.
Chunk their time as well.
Chunk their time. Yeah.
But they should never sit there. I tell my high school kids, you don't sit there more than 15, 20 minutes on anything. Stop. Go get something to eat, go to the bathroom, text a friend.
Right.
Come back, 15, 20 minutes more. They don't have enough energy to sit there for 3 hours to do it. I don't have 3 hours to sit there.
The other thing that I would say that you have to do sometimes with this is you have to keep in mind what you're really trying to do. You might see that the answer is wrong on the homework. You have to be careful about whether you're going to tell them that or not. Because is your goal to get them involved in the task or to be right? Sometimes you have to let the teacher do the corrections. You can send them with the wrong answer. You can alert the teacher and say, what we're working on here is how to approach this, not whether it's right or not. I'm going to leave that up to you because you're the teacher.
We don't want to see if mom and dad know how to do it.
No. So, last little piece of information from Desmond Tutu. Hope. You have to have hope, and definitely have hope, because these kids are amazing. Talk about creative, and I have another one in my office who's 23 years old, and he's producing and directing, videos for rap artists. I mean, it's pretty hot stuff, and it's amazing how because he's so motivated, how he keeps track of everything. Of course, during a session, I have to keep saying to him, no, right now, you don't look at your text messages, but he's getting there. So you have to have hope, and hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness that you feel sometimes. I could, as you could tell, I could talk about this forever and ever and ever. I just feel like we're probably not doing enough to really help people understand these kids and what they go through. And again, not as an excuse, not so you can wave your flag and say, give my kid this or give my kid that, because you're not going to get through to everybody. You just won't, because human beings are human beings. But if you reach 1, 2 people and they begin to understand, you've done a lot. And these kids deserve a chance.
I think COVID had a lot of effect on the kids that suffer from what they suffer from. Personally speaking, my son absorbed a lot of, I think, triple or whatever the amount of anxiety and fear. That when he has to do something, fear comes first. And then he gets overwhelmed, and like that sign, it goes from fear, whatever. He just stays stuck on that one. And when he's like that, I can't do nothing about it.
No, that's why any of these techniques to start to teach him about how to regulate himself.
Right.
So that you can't, because the goal is to get some dialogue going. Not a lot.
No.
You don't need a lot. You need to break the ice. Once you get things happening what kids will say to you is, you know, I often say, so how does it feel now that you've said that? And without exception, every kid says, I feel better.
Yeah. My son has literally said that COVID has done a lot of damage
Oh,
to
yeah.
him. And he can't, it's really, he's getting a little better. I try not to interfere.
Right.
I leave him alone. Sometimes I don't even talk to him because he gets to the point that he's unretrievable.
You know, and it's affected adults as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I have adults in my practice who, obviously working from home now, there's this whole thing about going back. And many of them are reevaluating their lives.
Right.
And they're anxious, and they're, you know, they don't want to be back there. They're going through a lot too.
Same, yeah.
And I see people who are, you know, CEOs of major organizations, and, you know, I mean, these are folks that, you know, they're trying to figure out where they fit now. None of us has ever experienced anything like this.
Yeah.
So there's a traumatic element to that.
Yeah, so I think that's where I'm dealing with first. Like how
So
to get
all
him
of you who stayed.
Look under your
I think
chairs.
Diane has the
You got a card.
So just to, first of all, Joe.
Sorry to keep you so late.
So now everyone knows why we brought Joe in to talk about this topic, and everyone heard we get a part 2. So
Happy to come back.
So Joe will be back. Thank you. And the takeaway from tonight is everybody give yourself some grace, give your kids some grace. And Joe taught me that. I've been working with Joe for years. That we have to sometimes not be so hard on our kids because they're annoying, but also not be so hard on ourselves. And, you know, the Child Committee, we really are here to listen to you guys. And please email us with some feedback, things you want to see, things that we could talk with Joe a little bit more about. And everything he presented today will be emailed out to everybody, including his contact information in case anybody would like to explore that as well, because he's outstanding. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and good luck.